Texas man Rowdy Maize was in the drive-through line of a Taco Bell in Temple at about 6 p.m. on July the 28th of 2022. As shown in surveillance footage, a man with reddish blonde hair approached Maize's pickup truck while it was in line. Following a brief interaction, the hitchhiker climbed into the bed of the vehicle and Maize continued on his way. Shortly thereafter, police were called to the 2600 block of South Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. They came upon Maize in critical condition, with multiple stab wounds to the neck and torso. The 25-year-old was transported to Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Temple, where he would later succumb to his injuries. Law enforcement spoke with a witness who watched a wounded Maize stumble into the roadway. The man told the witness that he'd been attacked by the same hitchhiker whom he'd picked up at the Taco Bell. After stabbing the victim, the suspect reportedly absconded in his pickup. Upon reviewing the fast food restaurant's surveillance footage, investigators identified the hitchhiker as Justin Glenn Boswell, aged 31. Local police had received multiple calls about a suspicious individual in the area and determined that Boswell was responsible for each of the complaints. The stolen pickup was eventually found abandoned in the city of Rockdale. 2 days after the incident, Rockdale police were tipped off about Boswell's whereabouts. He was tracked down and arrested on the Highway 77 overpass over US 79. He was held at the Bell County Jail on $1 million bond. In October of 2022, a grand jury formally indicted the man on murder charges. Number 6. James Batrick. Residents in Lyndhurst, Hampshire were awakened by an almighty bang during the early morning hours of December the 13th of 2014. A Mazda RX-8 being driven by 21-year-old James Batrick had plowed into a brick wall off the side of the roadway. All 4 of the vehicle's occupants, including the driver himself, were wounded in the crash, but to varying degrees of seriousness. Batrick was taken to Southampton General Hospital with what were described as non-life-threatening leg injuries. Meanwhile, 19-year-old Kimberly Selman suffered a fractured skull and neck injuries that kept her hospitalized for over a week. The 2 other passengers in the Mazda were identified as Lily Butterfield Godwin and Abby Rogers, both 19 at the time. As it would later emerge, Batrick had offered to give the teens a ride home from a local pub. However, he'd allegedly consumed at least 5 pints of cider and was high on cannabis before getting behind the wheel. Batrick neglected to turn his headlights on, despite limited nighttime visibility, and was driving much faster than the posted speed limit leading up to the crash. Both Rogers and Butterfield Godwin were killed in the head-on collision. The man was arrested and later admitted 2 counts of causing death by careless driving while unfit through drink or drugs and cannabis possession. During proceedings at Bournemouth Crown Court in September of 2015, he was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months behind bars. The following year, Batrick's jail term was reduced by 6 months. Number 5. Louis D. Coleman III. During the early morning hours of February the 24th of 2019, mother of one, Jassy Correa, was with some friends at a nightclub in downtown Boston, celebrating her upcoming 23rd birthday. Shortly after 2 a.m., the group left the club. As they made their way through the crowded sidewalk outside, Correa became separated from her friends. She noticed an Uber driver who was parked outside of the club and asked him for a ride. However, the driver refused, indicating that he was waiting for a larger group of people. As shown in surveillance footage, Correa was subsequently approached by a man who offered to drive her to her friend's apartment. The young woman accepted the offer and got into the man's vehicle, which proceeded to make a series of turns before pulling over not far from its starting point. About 2 hours later, security cameras at an apartment complex in Providence, Rhode Island, recorded the man carrying Correa over his shoulder and into the building. He then dragged her lifeless body in the direction of his apartment. Police identified the suspect as 36-year-old Louis D. Coleman III. In the days following his encounter with Correa, Coleman made several alarming Google searches, including "Can a person fit inside a suitcase?" and "How to clean for embalming." He purchased 36 pounds of baking soda, full body coveralls, as well as other items pertaining to a major cleanup. 4 days after Correa's disappearance, surveillance footage showed Coleman wheeling a large suitcase from his apartment to his vehicle. He struggled to lift the case into the trunk before driving away. Later that afternoon, he was stopped by Delaware police along Interstate 95 near Wilmington. He was ordered to step out of the vehicle, and upon being asked if he had any passengers with him, he replied, "She's in the trunk." Correa's bound and battered remains were found packed inside of a couch cushion cover, which Coleman then placed in a trash bag, which in turn he stuffed into the suitcase. The victim's body, which had been doused with baking soda, presented with severe bruises and a bloodied face. A medical examination would later establish that she'd been assaulted and suffocated. Coleman was arrested on a federal charge of kidnapping, resulting in death. In October of 2022, he was sentenced to life without parole. Number 4. Mary Lee Walker. On October the 16th of 2014, Florida woman Jessica Iroskin left Lido's Cabaret in Cocoa Beach, where she worked as an exotic dancer. The 27-year-old, who was heavily intoxicated, got into an SUV being driven by Mary Lee Walker, who would later be described as a friend of Iroskin. Shortly thereafter, the latter turned up dead, her body having been left along the side of Rose Drive in Cocoa Beach. After launching an investigation, local police determined that the woman had been the victim of a tragic hit and run, but the specific circumstances surrounding her demise remained a mystery for the next 5 years. Iroskin's family refused to accept law enforcement's version of the events leading to her death. They suspected foul play, so they hired a private investigator to look into the matter for them. According to the investigator, a boarding pass with Walker's name on it had been left near the location where Iroskin's body was found. By that time, the police had exhausted all available leads and were preparing for the case to remain cold indefinitely. In addition to the private investigator's findings, however, law enforcement spoke with an individual who knew Walker. The interviewee corroborated other witness statements and gave authorities enough information to pin the killing on Walker, who was charged with vehicular homicide and leaving the scene of a crash. A medical examiner found that Iroskin had suffered blunt force trauma to the head in a collision that killed her. In September of 2019, a year after her arrest, Walker was sentenced to 2 years of house arrest and 15 years of probation. Number 3. Carjacking at sub-zero temperature. Shortly after midnight on January the 17th of 2023, Michigan teen Jack Snider was found lying on the ground next to his car in the city of Battle Creek. As emergency medical personnel soon learned, the 17-year-old had suffered gunshot wounds, and his condition was rapidly worsening because of the frigid temperatures that night. Despite the best efforts of EMTs, Snider succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. Upon further investigation, law enforcement discovered the murder weapon, which led them to a local 14-year-old by the name of Justice Chimner. Investigators revealed that Chimner, along with a 13-year-old accomplice, asked the victim for a ride home from a birthday party because it was too cold for them to walk. Snider obliged, but the pair of teens subsequently produced a firearm and tried to carjack him. The victim was gunned down after resisting his attackers. Chimner was charged as an adult with felony murder and carjacking, as well as a pair of weapons offenses. Following his arrest, the unnamed 13-year-old turned himself in to the police. Though authorities declined to detail the suspects' criminal histories, they told the public that the two teens were known to them prior to the incident. Conversely, Snider was described as a well-rounded student athlete who was a member of the National Honor Society and played for the school's varsity soccer team. Today's topic was requested by Donnie Higgins 823. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. The disappearance of Jessica Azarinsky. On the evening of November the 28th of 2022, Australian woman Jessica Azarinsky vanished near Bossley Park in New South Wales. Surveillance cameras at a petrol station in Greenfield Park in Sydney's southwest recorded the 30-year-old woman climbing into the passenger seat of a blue Holden Commodore. The car reportedly belonged to a man whom she'd only just met. He pulled onto the M4 motorway and Great Western Highway before heading towards the Blue Mountains, with Azarinsky in tow. Then the following morning, the Commodore turned up at another petrol station in Mount Victoria. With Azarinsky still in the passenger seat, she was neither seen nor heard from after that. Police identified the unnamed man on the surveillance footage as the registered owner of the Commodore. However, he reportedly refused to speak with investigators about what transpired after Azarinsky got into his vehicle. In May of the following year, a 3-day search effort was launched in the Hampton State Forest to no avail. On the 1-year anniversary of the woman's disappearance, New South Wales police offered a $500,000 reward for information leading to her discovery. As of the latest developments, however, the search for Azarinsky was still ongoing. As you've seen, riding with strangers is already bad enough, but what happens when bringing a girl home goes wrong? Stay tuned till after number 1 to find out. Number 1. Hitchhiker in South Africa. After completing a tour of Botswana on February the 23rd of 2024, German tourist Hermann Gunther Friedrich Westphal got into his Toyota sedan and started driving to South Africa. The 74-year-old arrived in the coal mining town of Lephalale the following morning. He encountered a male hitchhiker who requested a ride and asked him about recommendations for places to stay in the Northwest Province. The hitchhiker, later identified as Jan Thabonga Moshabi from Zimbabwe, decided on accommodations in the village of Moruleng. Upon arrival, Moshabi suggested that Westphal drive them to a nearby liquor store. The elderly man obliged, and after sharing a few drinks with his passenger, the latter called up 2 of his friends to join them. At that point, however, the situation took a drastic turn. The 3 Zimbabwean men drove with Westphal back to the place where Moshabi was staying. Then they assaulted Westphal, tied him up, and demanded his bank account information. The tourist was killed in the attack, after which the suspects drove his car to Northam, where they discarded his remains. They subsequently removed the vehicle's license plates and made off with the victim's cash and valuables. Some time later, security personnel noticed the 3 suspects driving Westphal's Toyota with no plates. Upon investigating, officials observed bloodstains on Moshabi's shirt and contacted the police. Officers stumbled upon the victim's body in nearby bushes and arrested Moshabi on charges of murder and contravening the Illegal Immigration Act. His 2 accomplices, Abstein Madzvimbo and Thomas Moyo, were taken into custody later that day on identical charges. In early March, the 3 defendants made an appearance at Northam Magistrates Court in Limpopo. As of the latest developments, the case was still ongoing. A Florida man was robbed of his Submariner Blueface Rolex watch and Platinum Amex credit card during a late-night tryst with 2 young women at his home in the town of Lauderdale-by-the-Sea. The incident unfolded at around 3 a.m. on December the 4th of 2022, when the victim met the women outside of the rooftop bar in Fort Lauderdale where they shared drinks. They then exchanged contact details and agreed to meet up later. After an hour had passed, the man met back up with the women and drove them to his residence. They shared some more drinks, but the man eventually fell asleep. When he awoke, the women, as well as his Rolex watch, which was estimated to be worth $25,000, and credit card were nowhere to be found. Investigators determined through surveillance video at the rooftop bar that the women involved were in their mid-20s and had black hair. As of the latest updates, the Broward County Sheriff's Office sent a Crime Stoppers alert seeking information from the public regarding the 2 suspects. Number 10. Yomna Forward. An escort in Miami Beach, Florida, allegedly drugged and robbed a male client in March of 2017. 31-year-old Alain Renee Galette was outside Dream nightclub where he met a woman named Amina, aged 21. The latter reportedly suggested that the 2 of them go back to his place. After the 2 had intercourse at Galette's home, the man fell asleep. He woke up to discover that Amina was gone, along with clothes, cash, and jewelry valued at $32,000. At around 3 a.m. on April the 29th, Galette spotted Amina outside of the Rockwell nightclub. He confronted her on the street and contacted the police. Amina was arrested on charges of grand theft and using fraudulent identification. Detectives learned that her real name was Yomna Forward. Surveillance footage confirmed that she'd entered Galette's residential building and left by herself with his belongings. She was held in lieu of a $50,000 bond at Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center in Miami. Forward was also connected to similar thefts throughout the East Coast, stretching all the way up to New York. She later took a plea deal for her Florida cases, the details of which were undisclosed. After her release on April the 25th of 2019, Forward was extradited to New York, where she was facing 4 counts of grand larceny. No further updates were made after she pleaded not guilty on April the 26th. Number 9. Charlotte Newton. 25-year-old English woman Charlotte Newton, who robbed a 74-year-old man and his friend at knife point, was sentenced to 7 years in prison in 2022. The incident took place at the victim's Hull home, where he was having his 69-year-old friend over as a guest. Newton subsequently broke in with 2 masked men and another woman. She went to the kitchen, grabbed a bread knife, and held it close to the old men's throats as she threatened them. The victims were obviously terrified. Per testimony given in court, Newton and her accomplices left after taking approximately $140 in cash, as well as a mobile phone. The woman was later taken into police custody. On October the 19th of 2021, she denied 2 counts of robbery. During her trial, she admitted to being hooked on heroin at the time of the robberies and indicated she'd needed money to cover debts and expenses related to her addiction. Newton claimed that she knew the victim, having received more than $2,500 from him in the past for intimate acts. According to court records, Newton deliberately targeted the pensioner because he was vulnerable, and she thought he would be less likely to alert the police because of their prior involvement. Following her conviction and prison sentence, it wasn't clear if any of her accomplices were likewise brought to justice. Number 8. Chrissy. A woman only identified as Chrissy was sought by authorities in Fremont, California. After robbing a man on February the 7th of 2015, Chrissy was contacted by the victim through an escort services website. She emailed her picture to him, and the two arranged to meet. The man picked her up and they made their way back to his house in the Irvington neighborhood, where they would exchange money for intercourse. At one point, the man reportedly passed out. When he regained consciousness, his hands were tied behind his back, and Chrissy had been joined by 3 male suspects. The group assaulted the victim while demanding to know where he kept his valuables. The suspects proceeded to ransack the house, making off with laptops, phones, and money, leaving the man tied up. Eventually, he was able to free himself and called the police. He admitted to soliciting an escort on a casual encounters website, telling investigators that he might have been drugged by the woman. As of the latest updates, it was unclear if any arrests had been made in connection with the incident. Number 7. Nitsa Jean Charles. Florida woman Nitsa Jean Charles from Lake Worth was held in custody without bond for her involvement in a home invasion in Boynton Beach, during which a man was struck unconscious and had several teeth knocked out. On April the 13th of 2016, 20-year-old Charles had commercial intercourse with the 64-year-old victim at his home near Congress Avenue and Woolbright Road. 4 days later, Charles returned with several others to rob the man. She and her accomplices allegedly entered the home through an unlocked sliding glass door. During the home invasion, they allegedly struck the victim in the face with a handgun. The man suffered injuries to his eye and mouth as a result. The invaders subsequently took the homeowner's .22 caliber handgun and threatened him with it. 2 guests who were staying in the upstairs bedroom were also robbed. In the aftermath, the gun, jewelry, a television, and several other items totaling more than $10,000 were stolen. Investigators discovered palm prints at the scene of the crime, which they linked to Charles and 18-year-old Tariq Ely. On April the 30th, Ely was arrested and held without bond. Charles was taken into custody 6 months later. Both suspects were facing multiple felony charges. Records indicated that Ely was found guilty of robbery with a deadly weapon and was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Number 6. Monica De Jesus and Justin Harris. 22-year-old Monica De Jesus and 36-year-old Justin Harris faced several charges, including robbery, after an incident that occurred on April the 9th of 2017. The pair went to a home in the 1800 block of Valley Drive in East Goshen Township, Pennsylvania, at approximately 5:30 a.m. With a gun in tow, Harris kicked the door down, but was subsequently overpowered by a resident who hit him in the face with a fire poker. DeJesus then picked up the gun and pointed it at the homeowner while another resident ran away and called 911. DeJesus and Harris then fled in a sedan. They were spotted speeding down the road by a responding police sergeant who noticed that Harris was heavily bleeding from his face. The officer pulled the suspect vehicle over, at which point DeJesus claimed to have been attacked inside the house that she and Harris had just tried to rob. The latter was transported to Paoli Hospital for treatment of his facial injuries. Police discovered that DeJesus was an escort from Philadelphia who'd traveled to the area to meet a client. When she wasn't compensated for her services, she called Harris, who was waiting in a nearby parking lot. The duo then reportedly returned to the home where they attempted to carry out the robbery. DeJesus and Harris were taken into custody and booked at the Chester County Jail on charges of robbery, conspiracy, and promoting escort services. Number 5. NYC Tourist. In May of 2017, a male tourist was robbed after two women allegedly lured him back to his Manhattan hotel in New York City. According to police, the 79-year-old man from Florida met the women at an Upper East Side restaurant called Club Macanudo. Surveillance footage showed the three leaving the restaurant and going to the Lowe's Regency Hotel on Park Avenue. When they got to his hotel room, the women clobbered him and made off with a $13,000 watch and $3,000 in cash. The New York Post reported that the man sustained scratches to his face but refused to be hospitalized. While the victim remembered lounging at Club Macanudo, he claimed he couldn't recall meeting the women or anything else that took place inside his room. No arrests were made in the incident's immediate aftermath. Number 4. Zachary Kent Mills. Harris County Constable deputies responded to a call regarding a female patient at Houston Methodist Spring Emergency Care Center in Spring, Texas on December the 29th of 2022. The victim, only identified by the initials JW, told investigators that she'd met a man on the dating platform Bumble and the two started a romantic relationship. On Christmas Eve, JW was picked up by the man, later identified as 21-year-old Zachary Kent Mills. They went to Mills's apartment, located in the 8000 block of Augusta Pines Drive. When Mills's advances were repeatedly declined by the woman, he began punching and biting her in the face. He then allegedly used a screwdriver to attack her and stopped her when she tried to run out the door to escape. The woman was reportedly assaulted multiple times and held against her will for 5 days, during the course of which she was denied food and water and suffered serious bodily injuries. JW was eventually able to seek help from other nearby residents. On December the 30th, Mills was arrested and booked at the Harris County Jail on a charge of first-degree aggravated kidnapping. The latest updates indicated that he was released on a $50,000 bond. As part of his bond conditions, Mills was placed on 24-hour house arrest and could only leave to go to court, get groceries, or meet with his lawyer. He also wasn't permitted to go within 200 feet of the victim's house or place of work. Number 3. Saul Matias. On March the 18th of 2018, Saul Matias was robbed at gunpoint while celebrating a lawsuit victory at a motel in the Bronx borough of New York. According to the police, the man's $96,000 cash settlement was the end result of a suit involving a car accident. Villegas was carrying the entire amount in a suitcase when he checked in at the Van Cortlandt Motel. The 30-year-old hired escorts and partied with them in his room that night. Early the next day, the women suggested that they get a friend to bring over beer and cigarettes. Shortly before 7 a.m., two masked men arrived, armed with weapons, They barged into the room and snatched the cash-stuffed suitcase before speeding off in a black minivan. Villegas told the New York Post that he kept replaying the incident over and over and that he was haunted by it. He added that he needed the money badly because he was depending on it to move his family. Detectives released photos of the 3 escorts and 2 male robbers who remained at large. Number 2. Pompano Beach Robbery. 2 women were sought by law enforcement in Florida after being accused of theft on the night of December the 18th of 2022. According to detectives, the suspects met a man at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood. The man then brought the 2 women back to his townhouse in Pompano Beach. Surveillance footage captured the moment the pair made off into the night with the man's gun, sneakers, and diamond-encrusted watch. They milled around the property before sneaking out the front door and running through the parking lot with the stolen items. While fleeing the scene, one of the women experienced a wardrobe malfunction. As reported by Local 10, her dress got caught up in the moment. The Broward County Sheriff's Office released the footage, asking for the public's assistance in identifying the suspects. Number 1. Sarah Richards. On December the 11th of 2022, a woman was accused of concealing a man's Rolex watch in her privates in order to steal it. 33-year-old Sarah Richards was in Las Vegas for a court hearing in connection with an incident in June during which she allegedly stole a $100,000 timepiece. Richards reportedly met a man who invited her to stay in his room at the Aria Hotel. Richards asked the man to take off his Rolex watch, which he ended up placing under his pillow before canoodling with Richards. 8 News Now reported that the man drank more and more wine because Richards kept insisting on it. He began to doze off, then later discovered that the watch was missing. He confronted Richards, who fled the bedroom in a panic. The man followed her down the hallway into the elevator and then into the lobby, where he informed security that she'd stolen from him. They waved the woman down using their metal detector wand, which determined that there was metal somewhere in her genital region. She confessed to stuffing the $12,000 watch inside her privates. A female security officer then escorted Richards to a restroom where the watch was removed and placed in a biohazard bag. Upon the arrival of the police, the victim showed them the drink he'd been consuming prior to dozing off. A white, powdery substance was observed at the bottom of the glass, some of which were floating in the liquid. According to the police, they also found a pill capsule containing a white, powdery substance in Richards' possession. Officers impounded the pill capsule as well as the watch. Richards was taken into custody, charged with grand larceny and using a narcotic to facilitate a crime. Thanks for watching. If your car broke down in a remote area with no cell phone reception, would you wait for someone to help or leave your car behind and try to find the nearest town? Let us know in the comments section below.